Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be here with you for an open forum, 2 hours of open forum today. That means you can call with any question at all. Maybe you got a question about the Bible, you got a question about Jesus, you got a question about the church, the sacraments, a moral question, generally religious question. They're all welcome. 888-318-7884. And you don't have to be Catholic to call. The show's called Catholic Answers, but we'd love to talk with you, no matter who you are. We'd love to talk with you. 888-318-7884. Second hour, Jimmy Akin. First hour, Tom Nash. Tom Nash, of course, a long-time member of the Catholic media in various capacities as a theologian and an author, including of the book, What Did Jesus Do? Not what would Jesus do, what did Jesus do? It turns out the answer is found a church. And name some of the other books. So come on, give me some. I just drew a blank. The Biblical Roots of the Mass.
The Biblical Roots of the Mass. And then, of course, 20 Answers, the Rosary from Catholic Answers Press.
Tom Nash, thanks for being here with us.
Good to be here.
This is a very special day because it's the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Second Vatican Council, and I know you were there as a Paridi. So,
well, I can say I am pre-Vatican II, insofar as I was born March 8th of '62. So, in that sense, I am pre-Vatican II. But I'm with the Council. But no, I was not quite old enough to make the Per II status. But maybe next time around.
The Pariti are experts, right? Theological experts at the Council. I think a guy by the name of Joseph Ratzinger was one of those.
Yes, who became Pope Benedict XVI.
Yep, and Bishop Karol Wojtyła from
yes. Now he was one of the Council Fathers.
He was a Council Father, and you were just a baby at the Council. Everyone,
I was. I think I tried to get a seat for me, but it didn't work out.
All right.
I wasn't quite at the toddler stage, so.
The number is 888-318-7884. You want to talk about the Second Vatican Council? Want to talk about anything? You're welcome to call with your questions for Tom Nash. But first, I'm going to ask Tom some questions about the Second Vatican Council, because here's the deal. I say celebrate the opening of the Council. Today is the 60th anniversary, as I said, of the opening of the Council. But not everybody celebrates the Second Vatican Council. So is there something wrong with the Council? Is there something wrong with the people who won't celebrate it? Or is what we have here is just a failure to communicate?
Very good. Strother Martin that's also in the 1960s, I think later, Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah.
But an edited version, perhaps. I would say it is definitely worth celebrating. I was reading something on Catholic World Report earlier today, and of course we've got many resources on Catholic.com, but an old friend, Father Peter Stravinskas, did a nice retrospective on the Council and pointing out what the Council is and isn't, and distinguishing between the Council of the Media, as Pope Benedict later called it, versus the actual Council, and then distinguishing between the Council documents and the post-conciliar so-called spirit of Vatican II. And when you look at the documents themselves, and particularly on the dogmatic constitution of the Church, people will say, hey, it's just a pastoral council. Well, there were no new dogmas, but it certainly, as a dogmatic constitution, definitively reaffirms and advances the Church's teaching, for example, on the Eucharist. Of course, we also have the the Constitution on Divine Revelation, also a very important constitution, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, which hasn't always been implemented as well as it could be. Some things are done, again, in the name of the Council, but don't really have sound grounding in the Council. But I particularly like the dogmatic constitution on on the Church, because
Lumen Gentium, as it's often called.
Lumen Gentium, yes, the Latin term and Latin title. And because I like how people will misrepresent saying the word subsists. They'll say, oh, it's like it exists as a subset in the Catholic Church, God's Church, as if we're only part of the Church. Well, no, subsist means to exist as a substance. So we can say that there's the divine subsistence in the Trinity. Yeah, they exist as divine substances, so that the Church subsists in the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church is to say that it exists as a substance of the Catholic Church. We could say that the elements of sanctification that are proper to the church and gifts to the church can extend beyond the visible boundaries of the church, so that some people can be imperfectly incorporated, and that God's grace can be active outside the visible boundaries, because God is not limited. And so we see that, but everything is ordered towards coming back into full communion. That's why I also like the decree on ecumenism, Unitatis Redintegratio, the Latin title for the decree on ecumenism. So I think there's much to celebrate, properly understood, about the Catechism, and I like how the popes in recent decades have written about it. Dominus Jesus, which came out from, I think it was the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and that was under Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, but Cardinal Ratzinger served as the head of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith under Pope St. John Paul II.
It's really extraordinary how the council has dominated the life of the church for the last 60 years, however. And, when you look at it, we really suffered the loss of many priests, brothers and sisters. Of many religious communities. We've suffered a loss of vocations. We suffered a loss of vitality in marriage, as far as Christian marriage goes.
Yes.
So if it's such a great thing, and by the way, just to share this with you, Tom, I do think it's such a great thing. But I want to ask the question the way people ask: like, if it's such a great thing, why so much trouble in the last 60 years?
Yeah, and people would say if the Mass weren't changed, that would be one thing. Well, I'm all for reverence in the liturgy, and I think that what we known as more recently as the ordinary form, I don't like the term Novus Ordo, because it's typically used pejoratively regarding the Order Missae of Paul VI. But what I would say is that, you can look at the history of the Church. For example, you had the Tridentine Mass during, or I should say, not right, pretty much, but then it comes out of Trent, so it's really not there with King Henry VIII. But the trappings are basically there in the Latin Mass. The structure, I should say, and yet that didn't. Only one cardinal sticks around when things get heated in the church, and only St. John Fisher is standing there with the bishop alone. Or how about with regard to France and the French Revolution and how things went badly there? So it's never going to be the liturgy. It's always about encountering Christ, as you and I know, and the Tridentine Mass can be a beautiful way for people to encounter the liturgy, to encounter our Lord Jesus in the liturgy. I think it's important to realize what was going on in society, because whether you had a Vatican II or not, there was a tsunami, a cultural tsunami that began in the 50s and really crashed forward into the 60s with all kinds of things going on in terms of the overcoming of the movie code, the Legion of Decency, and I would just say the Hollywood Code, which Legion of Decency was a Catholic entity, but the Hollywood Code, production code, had a no nudity mandate, prohibition. And then, of course, you got all the things going on with movies. And then more recently, we've got the internet, God help us, which is a very good thing, as we know, just like radio or TV properly used. But of course, it makes things that which used to take a public act. I remember speaking to Professor Hahn when I was in Steubenville back working for Catholic Shrine for the Faith, and what used to take a public act, like to buy a certain bad magazine or go to a bad movie, is now easily available on demand, sadly, through the internet. So that's and I think that's what's contributed, sadly, to things like human trafficking and other things like that. So I think we got to realize that there was a cultural tsunami which would have challenged things, and you can't just look at, well, this happened after the council, therefore because of the council, because there are other factors to consider. But no doubt we need a renewal, and we need to encounter Christ in the liturgy, and it all begins. And I'm glad that's why we're having a Eucharistic revival. We've already started, but these next few years in America.
Tom Nash is our guest. It's open forum. A bunch of folks on the line. One line open, 888-318-7884. Big day, 60 years since the opening of the Second Vatican Council. If you've got questions about that, you're welcome. Questions about anything else, those are welcome as well. We'll be right back with questions for Tom Nash during this open forum on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live. Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Hi friends, Janet Williams here. Join me every Wednesday on Women of Grace Live as I welcome New Age researcher and blogger for Women of Grace, Sue Brinkman. Sue and I will be talking about all the wacky things that could distract you from your faith. Psychics, yoga, Reiki, crystals, acupuncture, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and astral traveling are just a few of the stranger things we discuss. That's why we call it Wacky Wednesday. So join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Bienvenue back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Tom Nash is our guest this hour. Jimmy Akin next hour. Both hours, it's open forum. And we start in Hastings, Michigan. Seriously, Edgar. We're starting in Hastings, Michigan. Aaron in Hastings, Michigan, watching on YouTube. You are up first, Aaron. Go ahead with your question for Tom.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, guys.
Thank you.
The question I had was, and also thank you for talking about Vatican II, because I did have a lot of questions on that.
Oh,
you
okay.
answered a good portion of them.
Oh, good.
Praise God.
But the question I had was, how can you tell if somebody's possessed by the devil?
Yes, that's a good question, and this is something Catholic Answers has dealt with. So I know you've interviewed exorcists. We've got information on exorcisms on our website, Catholic.com. Encourage people to always check our website with its great search engine to check for further information. But this is where the church always has a psychologist or a psychiatrist to look at situations, because they want to shall we say, rule out medical, psychological, and psychiatric factors which can give the appearance of possession but are not. And some of the things that you can see when that are observable, that are determinative, are, for example, the speaking of a language fluently, which has never been studied before. The issue of clairvoyance. I remember there was a Dr. Gallagher, as a psychiatrist, who's pointing out that first time he met this lady who was possessed, she knew that he had cats. She also knew about his mother's death and how she died, and it wasn't like one of these kind of cold readings where they start, kind of checking it out, and they get a gullible person and they kind of draw them out. These were things that they knew concretely without having to probe, and of course, Dr. Gallagher is himself a psychiatrist, Ivy League trained. So those are you got that. You also have sort of clairvoyance, studying of languages. Superhuman strength, although that would be more of a sustained situation versus, because people can say, hey, what about if somebody picks up a telephone pole, adrenaline, things like that. There's also oftentimes the manifestation of the movement of objects. And we're not just talking, some kind of cheap telekinetics, but in fact, things coming off the wall of their own happening. And then other phenomena. I would encourage, again, to look at our website, Aaron, and then also our friend Adam Bly, who BLAI, you use the word peritus, and he is that with regard to exorcisms, and he's got his own website, Adam Bly, BLAI. But again, look at our website as well. I think we've got an interview with him and plus with other exorcists on it. But that's basically an overview.
Okay, Aaron, all that make sense to you?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom, you said I've interviewed exorcists, and that is not true. I've interviewed one exorcist, and it freaked me out so much, I'm not doing that again. All
right. Well, I'll step in if you'd like.
Oh, he was a lovely priest, but it was his calm demeanor that actually freaked me out the most when he started talking about people levitating and walking up walls and stuff, and I was like,
Yeah,
this
that's
is
a
the
good
last
point.
time I'm doing this.
There would be phanomena as well. Some of those, shall we say, extraordinary phenomena. There was a case in Indianapolis where somebody walked up the wall backwards. So you mentioned Michael Jackson. This guy did it backwards.
No, I
He was
didn't
the
mention
moonwalk
Michael
up
Jackson.
a-
That was at the break that
early-
we were talking about. Michael
I'm
Jackson. We
sorry,
weren't on the
that you
air.
did. Sorry about that, people. So anyway, Michael Jackson did the moonwalk. That's going backwards. This guy did it backwards up the wall and to the ceiling, and then did a flip. So why do we say this? Not to be fearful of demons, but rather that sometimes people realize the reality of God by realizing the reality of fallen spirits, so that we should not be fearful of them, but be on guard.
Be on guard, right?
Says,
Yeah.
and be vigilant and live a holy life.
You know what this exorcist told me you do when someone's levitating?
What's that?
Push them back down. It just seems so basic, but that's what he said. Yeah, just push them back down. Mitch in Wisconsin, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Mitch, thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Tom.
Hi. So my question was, I've been in college for a couple of years now, and I'm just getting to the point where I want to start supporting the church with tithing. I know that's the fifth precept and everything. And I don't want, I'm trying not to get scrupulous about it, but I'm trying to figure out how I can give an appropriate amount, not go crazy, give too much, but also not give anything that might dare inconvenience me even a little bit. And I tried to talk with my father just about financial considerations, about what he thought would be a good amount, but he kind of just told me to just toss a 10, a 5, a 20 their direction every once in a while. And I was kind of thinking maybe that wouldn't be enough. And just for perspective, I was kind of looking at about maybe like a monthly tithe. And I am in a good place financially also. So that was another thing that I was trying to consider. But there's just so many factors, and I just wasn't really sure where to start.
Wait, you're in your second year of college and you're a good place financially? Because I think you might be the one person in the United States in that situation.
He's
Congratulations
on
that, Mitch. Tom, can you help?
Sure. And I think that's a good consideration right off the top, Mitch, that if one is taking out loans and things like that, that's a consideration. The church, even on tithing for those outside of college, doesn't say a strict amount like 10%, like some of our Protestant brothers and sisters say. And I also would say that those who are open to bigger families and are blessed as such, that itself is giving to the church, because we got disciples that are being raised by mom and dad, little saints. And also traditionally it's been understood, and for good reason, that supporting a Catholic school is a form of tithing, that the tuition that goes into that. And that's why you see, for example, the Diocese of Wichita, Kansas, they're great friends of ours at Catholic Answers, and they have they're a real model for how people support, and it's everyone's business, not just the looking at it as a Catholic family, and not just those who are sending kids to the school at any one time. But I would say, if you can go 5 or 10% of your net income, that's something to think about, and I think it's something for you to be commended for, because a lot of times people will think first about spending on food or some other type of social activity. So that I would try to take a percentage, and Mother Teresa would say, give until it hurts and then give some more. But you want to be reasonable without being, but not and to make a sacrifice, but you don't want to be scrupulous, like you said. So I would think 5 or 10%, depending on how that fits into your budgets of your net income, and seeing where that applies, and then you can adjust accordingly. But there's not a strict percentage that the church requires, but certainly if you can be generous, and if you say you're in a good financial shape because you got good scholarships, or you're living at home like I did when I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan way back when, then those are considerations that might free up some more money that maybe people who have to work a little more to pay their tuition or have loans, etc., maybe it'd be more challenging for them.
Mitch, what a beautiful question. Thank you so much. I hope that was indeed helpful to you. And again, congratulations on being in good enough shape to be able to ask that question. The number here is 888-318-7884. Just 2 lines open. It's open forum, so you can call and ask whatever you like, and anybody can call. You certainly don't have to be Christian to call. We're happy to take calls from anybody. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, you've always been curious about something about the Catholic faith, you just want to ask it, don't think you're holding us up from the usual business. That is the usual business here. So we're happy to talk with you, whether it's a very complex question or simple, straightforward question. 888-318-7884. Tom Nash, our host, he never mentions being a graduate of the University of Michigan as much as when they are undefeated as a football team. Never comes up as much as when they have not yet lost a game.
No, that and I would mention to please give extra prayers. But since you mentioned it, Jim Harbaugh, great pro-life Catholic, and God bless him for his witness, especially in a not so pro-life state as Michigan, at least in terms of what they're trying to do on Proposition 3.
I didn't know that about. I mean, I don't know a lot of things, but good for him, because it's hard to be in any public in the public eye and be a pro-life person. So God bless him.
And he was very vocal. Just a quick note about it, and I love the headline which came out of his. And I was blessed to be there this past July in Plymouth, Michigan, where he said the headline that came out of it: "Do we have courage enough to let the unborn child be born?"
God bless him.
And so, yeah.
Well, Tom, I know you'll keep mentioning that you're a graduate of the University of Michigan until they lose a game. So every time we have you on,
and Steubenville in Missouri as well. don't want to feel like I'm slighting anybody. Franciscan University and the University of Missouri for journalism.
Tiffany in Ohio, watching on YouTube. You are next, Tiffany. Go ahead with your question for Tom Nash.
Hi. Me and my husband are thinking about converting, but I had a question when it came to the Catholic stance on special needs children and adults.
Yes.
I have 2 special needs children, and I know there's a process of going through to become Catholic.
Yes.
And I didn't know what that could mean if they don't fully understand what they're saying, or, being understood, everything that goes with the Bible and the rules.
Sure. So you have you and your husband thinking about coming in, and then that would mean that your adult special needs children who might not understand the conversion process would be coming in as well. Do I have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what is the church's stance on that, Tom?
Well, following what our Lord says in the Bible, that with regard to the children, the little ones, do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. And thus, if babies can be baptized who do not have the faculty of reason, so too can children and young adults and adults who have special needs. A good example is my little sister Mary, who they didn't expect to live days or weeks, let alone months or years. She lived till she was 42, but she had pulmonary and also heart condition when she was a kid, a real witness, but she had Down syndrome, and she went through the sacraments, not just baptism, but indeed First Communion and confirmation. So I would just have her connect with your local parish that you join and are considering joining, and asking how they could get your children, your adult children, or those who are not yet adult who might have special needs. And if necessary, you can contact the diocese as well. But I'd like to think that the parish should help you guys to navigate that, because our Lord's blessings are for all of us, whether we have the greatest intellect or whether we're infant babies, or whether oftentimes, I would say that those who are Down syndrome have a real witness and can humble us because of the love that they have and the fact that they don't hold grudges, and they are real models of forgiveness, which many quote-unquote normal people have a real problem with.
Tiffany, is that what you're looking for? Is there some other way we can help?
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's exactly. I was just worried that if they couldn't understand it, would that mean that they weren't fully confirmed and, was fully into the Catholic Church?
No,
okay.
that we will welcome them, praise God. And if there's any issues, talk to your diocese, but I would like to think your local pastor that you're considering joining would be able to help out and be very gracious and desirous to help out.
I should also tell you that the United States Catholic bishops have several documents on this that I don't know if anyone has given them to you, but you can go to usccb.org. That's the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, usccb.org, and just put in people with disabilities or just the word disabilities in their search engine, and you'll have lots of resources there on catechesis, on evangelization, on sacramental life for people with disabilities, okay?
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you,
Excellent
Tiffany.
follow-up there, Mr. Kellett.
I'll tell you what, Tiffany, since you're working your way into the church as well, if you'd like a free book, I'd love to send you a copy of Jimmy Akin's book, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. If you'd like it, just hang on the line, and Edgar will get an address and we'll send it off to you. If you have more questions, you can contact us by email here, radio@catholic.com, and we'll get you in touch with experts on these things. Or if you'd like to call the show again, you're always welcome to do that. That brings me to the halfway mark, though, so I have to take a quick break. Tom Nash is our guest. It is open forum. You are welcome to call with any question you have about Catholic faith, we love to talk about Jesus. You want to talk about the sacraments. You want to talk about the moral life. Whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're thinking about being Catholic or not, you're welcome to call here, 888-318-7884. The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with why we're pro-life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hey, Anna Mitchell here. Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll be celebrating the feast of Pope St. John the 23rd and marking the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Second Vatican Council. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It's open forum today, both hours. Open forum, Jimmy Akin, second hour. Tom Nash, our guest this hour, and you are very welcome, 888-318-7884. Lots of calls right now, so off we go. Back to the phones, and Mike in Green Bay, Wisconsin, watching on YouTube. Mike, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Tom.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. Tom, I'm not very knowledgeable about Vatican II, but I think maybe the most visible thing that came out of it was having Mass in the vernacular. That being the case, and with the vernacular being different all over, how did we end up going from that to the highest levels of the Church? Seemingly trying to push down Latin Mass, which to me is almost one of the great equalizers and one of the things that can bring everyone together, because Latin's the same anywhere you go.
This is true, and that's why being a quote-unquote dead language that doesn't change, it becomes the official. It's a good benchmark against which to put official church documents. because it doesn't have the elasticity in the problematic sense of that word that can, things can change meanings over time. But there's always been, and this is Paul VI's Ordo Missae, which came out several years after the council. There was always a Latin version of that mass, of that rite. So but you don't necessarily see that a lot. I think sometimes it might be a question of implementation. It says that that Latin is supposed to be maintained in the liturgy, but that wasn't always done. I think we've seen in more recent decades where things like the Agnus Dei, the Gloria, the praying of the Creed, that De Confiteor, those are all prayers within the Mass that are making a comeback. In addition, it's similar to, even though it was unfortunately downplayed, yes, the Church called for the council about having things available to the vernacular, in the vernacular language, the local language, but not to the exclusion of Latin. So that's point number one. But this is similar to, it says that the organ has pride of place, but oftentimes in the late 60s, and I'm old enough to remember late 60s, oftentimes you'd have guitar masses and things like that, and you wouldn't necessarily have the organ, or because in my parish, St. Mary Redford in Detroit, there was such a big parish that they had masses in the quote-unquote all-purpose room of the new gym, which was doubled as normally the cafeteria for the high school students, and not exactly the greatest sacred space. Not to say that people weren't being reverent in the liturgy, but it's just not as good of a sacred space, and you don't have the organ. So there's another case where the organ says pride of place because it most approximates the sound of the voice. And so you unfortunately, you have these trends that come out after the council in misguided attempts to implement the council or steer it one way or the other, and we had what we had. But I was just speaking of the organ and speaking of the voice, just at the Catholic Answers Conference in La Jolla, California, and I have to say that Floriani, the group there, and you were there, Si, that just is a reminder how beautiful you can have with sacred music with just voice. And you don't necessarily even have, although these guys were great with multiple languages singing, but that you can just have beautiful reverent music with just the voices, and that you don't necessarily need instruments. Although I think when accompanied by the organ, that's the best of both worlds.
Mike, address what you wanted to know?
No, I agree. I guess, like you said, it's how things are implemented. It's sad for me to see as much divisiveness as this topic has brought on, to the point where Latin's almost being relegated to a second-class citizen. You have to get permission, and you can only do it this way, and you can only have it here or there. To me, I think you'd want to bring everyone together, and what better way to do that than one single language around the world that can be used in that way? So, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it could be a great both and, Mike, where you can have the readings in the vernacular, the local language, also have beautiful prayers and have people learn them in Latin. So it could be a great both and. But I think sometimes too, people look back as we speak about the council and try to think, well, why things are today? It must have been the council was bad. It reminds me of when people would say the last valid pope was Pius XII. And John the 23rd wasn't, because they didn't like how Vatican II went, and that Cardinal Siri, who at the time was one of the people for being up for being Pope in '58, he was not elected. But many of his so-called sedevacantists, those who don't believe there's a Pope, they were thinking he was the valid Pope. Now, it's ironic because he never claimed that, and he was trying to still become Pope, or open to become Pope, I should say, in 1978, when there were two conclaves in the late summer, and obviously it was John Paul I and John Paul II who were elected, but he himself did not give support to the narrative of the sedevacantists, because he never said, no, guys, I was not validly elected, etc. Or, I was validly elected, I've been deposed unlawfully, etc. So unfortunately, we come up with a lot of misguided theories for people who are trying to desperately account for problems in the world. And as a great priest, Father Mankowski, Paul Mankowski, who was a Jesuit, a very holy man, that God will permit, and always we should strive for holiness, but sometimes you can have things going on in the church which are less than perfect, just as they were in Old Covenant times, and we don't look and say, oh, the Pope's no longer the Pope just because certain things have been said or done. We need to stay faithful to Christ and his church, knowing that Christ will be faithful to his church, and we're first and foremost Catholics because Jesus founded the church.
I just realized every single line full, so I'm going to keep moving. But thank you very much for the question. I hope it was helpful to you. I'm going to go all the way up to Vancouver, Washington now. Bob in Vancouver. Thanks for waiting, Bob. Go ahead with your question for Tom Nash.
I just happened to get on to this. I had a question that I put on my computer, and in regarding to the location of the Vatican as to I watched the Passion last night, and I was disturbed about the punishment that Jesus took on, and it was unbelievable. And I got to thinking, how could any human being live through that sort of thing? I would think that they would have passed out completely. And I believe the answer was that Jesus Christ was not only human, but he was godlike as well.
Exactly. So, he is God, yes.
Yeah,
is that your question?
That's the only reason. The other question that I have, it has to do with I'm 88 years old, and I don't expect to live more than another year or two due to heart disease and kidney disease and everything else.
God bless you, brother.
Throughout my life, I was raised Episcopalian, but I kind of ventured away from that and ventured away from everything really for many, many years, until I got to thinking, Bob, you're gonna meet your maker before long, and you better start thinking about this. And it's a bit hypocritical of me, but I have really turned the corner, and so I'm really happy to be able to come on and listen to you, and I hope I can get put you on my bookmark to hear more of you. But the other question that I had to do with Leviticus and the way the morality that has just degraded over my lifetime. It's just so significant, and it is so obvious in Leviticus that men with women and women with women and men or humanity with beasts and everything else. I mean, where's it all going? Is Armageddon coming soon or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to come back to you, Bob, but let's start with that. Is Armageddon coming soon, Tom?
Well, we don't know for sure, but we do know Messiah is always at our particular judgment. And Bob, you talked about you don't think you have much longer on this earth. Of course, it could be my last day tonight, depending on who knows what happens. Go to the grocery store and get hit by a car. God have mercy. So we always need, but you point out that there were sins then the time of Leviticus. Those sins are still with us today, and they've gotten worse. But thank God for the church, right? And I know you've also expressed interest regarding the church, and why would we even have a place like Rome? Why would you put a place where they executed the church? The Romans, it wasn't the Romans by themselves, but at the behest of the Jewish leaders of the day. Of course, they were all Jewish at the time, Jesus, and so it was really Jewish against Jewish perspective at the time. But Rome was the center of the world, and so Peter and Paul go there, and because all roads lead to Rome, right? That becomes the center, and truly all Rome's did. So it makes sense. It makes, shall we say, both. humanly sound and divinely providential sense to set up shop there in Rome, because it's such a center place to the whole world as it existed at the time.
So I just want to go back to Bob, because Bob, you were asking about Armageddon. Is there more that we can do for you on that, or?
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm 88 years old, and I have witnessed the change of society that have occurred over that period of time, and it is dramatic. It is really, and not only that, but it's going to increase. But as it is right now, it's going to continue to increase at an increasing rate.
Let me ask you this, Bob, because it seems to me that at my age of 58 and your age of 88, there's enough perspective to say every time the world falls into this kind of moral disorder, nothing good comes of it. It comes to violence. It comes to it comes to breakdowns of society, and it seems to me that it's so obvious that this is not leading to anything good, these breakdowns in society. I wonder if you have the same sense, Bob. You almost wish you could shake people and say, come on, we've done this 1,000 times before. This is not leading to liberation. This is leading to violence and slavery.
You know, what I'm thinking is that this country has become so extremely liberal, and the rights of the people have just been way too liberal, I think. I don't know. I'm not a fascist, but I'm beginning to think that you don't have this deterioration like in China or Russia or whatever. I mean, people are held to be responsible, and here in the United States, it's, I believe in not but democracy, but good grief, murders, people that get judges are letting murderers out of jail and so on, and it's just I can't believe it. It's just unbelievable to me.
To me as well, Bob. I wonder. You did say that you're living more of a faith life now. Are you coming into the Catholic Church, Bob?
No, actually, you might say I'm not even going to church at all because I'm going to Presbyterian.
Well, welcome home, Bob. You're welcome home.
I see what you're saying.
It's a good start.
Bob, I did not make a joke at the expense of the Presbyterians. Bob did. I just want that to be clear. Bob, I have to go to a break.
I go to church and it's an hour long, and the first 15, 20 minutes is, witnessing kids getting instructions and so on, and shaking hands with everybody and so on, and then the only thing that is any delivering to me is the sermon.
Praise God.
And this last Sunday they spoke about trying to increase on your own humility as to who you are, and you're no better than the homeless or anybody else, no matter what their situation is. You're just a person, and you're just like one of the stars in the sky. So,
well, Bob, I'm glad you're coming closer to the Lord, and I don't think it's hypocrisy at any time to come closer to the Lord. When we realize that we need to, we should. I'd like to send you a book if you would like it, Bob. It's called The Words of Eternal Life. It's by our own Jimmy Akin. It's very short. It's almost a booklet, you might say, about the very move that you're making, coming closer to the Lord. If you want it, hang on. Unfortunately, I have to go to a break, Bob. I could talk to you all day, but I can't talk to you all day. So we'll take the break. You stay on the line if you'd like the book. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Tom Nash on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
One time somebody said to me, "Why don't you air these people?" And I said, "No, because I don't think they're Catholic." He says, "By what right do you have to say that?" I said, "I own the network."
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Sometimes, to me, I don't know if you're like this, Tom. You meet a person like Bob, you just want to chat with Bob. Like he's been doing it for 88 years, coming back to the Lord. But late have I loved you, Lord. That's what. Who said that? Late have I loved you, Lord.
Augustine.
Augustine, yeah. So I mean, we can all say that. Late have I loved. None of us did it on time, except for one. One person did it on time. Loved
and as that one group said, foreigner love isn't always on time. You remember that one. but more to the point, I think Bob said about bookmarking Catholic Answers so we can listen to Catholic Answers Live. And also, hey, reach out to a parish, Bob, if you're still listening, and contact the local parish. Maybe they come by and talk to you if you're not as mobile as you once were for getting out.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate your concerns about America. China has and Russia have their own issues with all the thing Russia would do with its oppression and pushing abortion for many years in China too. But there's something to be said, a legitimate law and order overseeing things, including a law and order that defends the most helpless, the unborn.
It was great talking with Bob. Let's go to Lisa in Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Lisa, go ahead with your question for Tom Nash.
Hi. And thank you so much for taking my question.
Oh, we're happy to, Lisa.
I was raised, thank you. I was raised in Dallas and went to Catholic schools, Catholic high school in the 50s.
Praise God.
And
wonderful.
And in the 60s, but I was in high school in the 60s. And pre-Vatican II, I loved going to Mass. And I remember thinking I was in heaven. I believed I was in heaven as a little girl. And the First Communion, the experiences of sacred music, like you said, we had a pipe organs, we had a cappella, and singing the liturgies. It was beautiful. And whether it was Latin or not, it didn't matter. And I remember the whole reason we were there was we were in a place that transcended us to heaven, and there was a final climax was receiving Jesus in the Holy Eucharist.
Yes.
And so that's how I loved it. I loved going. And then in the 60s, after Vatican II, and there was a lot of holiness and reverence. People walked in, you were quiet, you wore your best, and the reverence was just phenomenal. And so I remember hating to come out of church because the noise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is something that I miss as well, the sense of leaving this world, not being just in another, room, but that
sacred space.
Yeah, that sacred space, that silence. I do have to hurry you a little bit, Lisa, because we're getting near the end. Did you want to ask a question or make a point or?
Yes, because I went through the transition not very well and struggled. But my question is, I don't really know what the aim was, Vatican II. But are there any statistics and any data showing what fruits were gained Like,
Well,
do
I
we
think
have more Catholics? Do we have?
Well, we do. Yeah. Now we could talk about participation and that maybe participation, particularly in the English-speaking world and also in Europe, not what it once was in terms of Sunday participation. I like that term, participation versus attendance, because you attend a play, but you're supposed to participate in Mass fully, as Vatican II says. But I would say, as far as increased numbers, we've seen the church grow tremendously in Asia and South America, particularly in Africa and other parts of Asia. And we see where once we were missionaries to those countries, the United States and English-speaking and Europeans, now they have come back and are missionaries to us, as we've seen many African and Indian priests serving in the United States of America. I would also say we've seen an increase in religious orders, even though we've seen maybe the Jesuits that have gone down. We've seen a renewal of the Vatican of Dominicans in significant ways, depending on which province. But I would also say, whether it's the Sisters of Life or various other good religious orders, the Franciscan Friars of the Eternal Word who serve at EWTN, wherever orthodoxy is celebrated, you are going to see fruitfulness. That is, you are going to see spiritual multiplication, not only in the number of vocations they have in themselves, but also in terms of the fruitfulness of the people they serve. And similarly, where dissent reigns, you are going to see just the opposite. Orders contracting and churches closing. And so it's a good reminder that ever ancient, ever new, the truth always sets us free.
I'd like to add one thing to Lisa, if I may, and then I'd love to hear your response. But to me, when you talk about the fruits of the Second Vatican Council, it's things like this radio program, which are entirely produced by lay people.
There you go. Well done.
Broadcast over EWTN, which is a work of lay people. I'm certainly founded by a woman religious, but it's a work that she shared and shares today with thousands and thousands and thousands of lay people who contribute, who work there, who produce the shows and all that. And there was nothing like that before. This burgeoning of lay movements like Opus Dei, or you could go on one side all the way from Opus Dei all the way over to the Catholic Worker or something on the other, all of which are striving in their way to be faithful. So to me, those are the fruits. There's before the Second Vatican Council, there were no Catholic radio stations in the U.S., but today there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Catholic radio stations, all supported by lay people. Lisa, I want to give you the last word if you'd like it.
Well, I agree with that, because it was EWTN and Mother Angelica that brought me, I would say inspired me to focus more in my faith and what I had remembered and what that was reignited, I would say.
Yeah. And also,
I think, yes. But I had two friends that were nuns that left in the 60s.
Right.
Well, they left in the 70s. But it's I do know that we're getting more communities now, because we lost an awful lot of them. I remember that. But
yeah, I mean, I suppose
I just wondered, if Vatican II had anything to do, or if EWTN is bringing us back to that point where reverence and holiness is coming back.
Sure. And Mother was a big advocate of Vatican II, and that's an excellent thing, that point that Asai is making, that she was a great advocate and implementer of the proper spirit, genuine spirit of Vatican II.
Yeah, and it is also the case that Pope Francis has called on us to have more holy liturgies, and certainly he's controversial in some of his liturgical decisions, but I mean, he is calling on us to reconsider the way we celebrate Mass and to and to do so more reverently together. I think he just doesn't want us to do it in a separated way. He wants us to do it together. And I don't know if enough of us are taking him up on that call. I think there's a long way to go on listening to the call for a shared reverence at Mass together. Lisa, thank you so much. Hang on if you'd like. I'll send you a copy of Jimmy Akin's book, The Bible is the Catholic Book. If you'd like it, hang on and we'll send it to you. Tom Nash, God bless you, brother. Thank you very, very much for doing this hour with us.
Great to be here on the 60th anniversary of Vatican II and with the Catholic Answers audience and you as host and all of the people behind the scenes who make Catholic Answers Live possible.
Praise God, man. We'll find out when you come back if Michigan is still undefeated. Jimmy Akin next. Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's open forum, and your calls are welcome. 888-318-7884. Whatever your question is, it's going to be welcome this hour. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of that book that you always hear me giving away, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. And if you don't want to call and wait around and see if you can get a free copy, you can get that book at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy, of course, also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett.
And how are you doing today, Jimmy Akin?
I'm doing fine, Cyril Kellett.
Well, that's very good, Jimmy Akin. What's dropping tomorrow? Oh, no, not tomorrow. Sorry, I just get in that habit because I'm used to you on Thursdays. Yeah. What's dropping Friday on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, this week is the 60th anniversary of the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. And we already talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis a few months ago on Mysterious World when there were some initial concerns about, the war in Ukraine and are the Soviets going to go nuclear and things like that. So I wanted to cover the Cuban Missile Crisis early, but there's another part of the story to tell, because after the event that we know as the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a second secret Cuban Missile Crisis that America and the world did not know anything about.
Wow.
And so we're going to be telling the story this Friday of the second secret Cuban Missile Crisis, because once you've put nuclear missiles in Cuba,
hard to get them out, huh?
How do you get them out? Yeah. And there was a whole big thing behind the scenes. So
wow.
with Khrushchev trying to convince Castro to give them up.
Well, Khrushchev trying to, so not even our side, their side trying to get Castro to give them up.
Yes, because Khrushchev wanted very much to avoid nuclear war, and he cut a deal with President Kennedy. But because of superpower syndrome, where if you're the head of a superpower, you tend to assume everyone's going to just go along with you in smaller countries.
Yeah.
He didn't even consult Castro first. Castro was highly incensed and did not want to give up the nuclear weapons that he had.
Wow. All right. The second secret Cuban Missile Crisis, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, drops on Fridays. It's always, just because you brought that up, it bothers me when I see, and for a variety of reasons, the Che Guevara T-shirts. But among them, Che Guevara begging Khrushchev to fire the missiles off and blow up the eastern half of the United States. Why would anyone wear that madman's T-shirt? I'm sorry, it just bugs me. It's open forum, 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Earlier we had a question about demon possession, and I wondered if you had a take on that. How do you know if someone's possessed by a demon?
So there are a lot of kind of folk ideas about this question, but I like to cut through the folk ideas and go straight to the sources. And the source for this is the Rite of Exorcism. It was revised in 1999. I've also got the previous one, which was from the translation I have of it is from the 1960s. But I like to go straight to the source. And in the current Rite of Exorcism, it contains an introduction that discusses diagnostic criteria for evaluating whether someone is genuinely demon-possessed or not. And the first thing it does is it has a discussion of things that a potential exorcist should not do. And I won't, things that he should not assume are evidence of demonic involvement. And I won't go through those in a lot of detail, but basically one of the things it says is that, first of all, this is a direct quote, first of all, he should not too easily believe that someone is possessed by a demon. So there's the first criterion.
Yeah.
First thing he should not do. When the person may be laboring under some illness, especially of a psychological nature. So whatever the person's reporting could be due to physical illness or especially psychological illness. Likewise, he absolutely should not believe that possession is present when, for the first time, someone claims to be tempted in a special way by the devil, to be desolate, and finally to be tormented. For one can be deceived by one's own imagination. So you want to be really careful on that front. It also goes on to say he should accurately distinguish cases of the devil's assault from the credulity with which some people, even the faithful, think that they are the object of evil doing, which means black magic, of bad luck, or of a curse brought by others upon them or upon their relatives or upon their goods. So you don't want to listen too credulously to stories of black magic and curses and bad luck and things like that. Then it gets down to the actual diagnostic criteria. It says that an exorcist, therefore, should not proceed to celebrate an exorcism unless he has ascertained with moral certitude that the one to be exorcised is really possessed by a demon, and, if it is possible, celebrate the exorcism, with the consent of the person. According to established practice, the following are considered as signs. So they're not individually proofs, but they're signs of being possessed by demons. And then it names several of them. The first one is speaking a number of words in an unknown language or understanding someone speaking. The second one is making known distant and hidden events. And then it says also showing strength. So this is the third one, showing strength beyond the nature of the individual's age or condition. Such signs can offer some indication. Since, however, signs of this kind are not necessarily to be reckoned as coming from the devil, and that's a very important qualifier. So what the three previously named, and they're just illustrative, they're not the only ones, but they're the ones that are named here. Speaking or understanding a language you haven't studied, revealing distant or hidden information, and displaying abnormal strength. Those can be some indication, but as the text itself notes, they are not automatically from the devil. I mean, for example, speaking or understanding another language that you haven't studied. Okay, can you think of anyone besides the devil Psychelet who might produce that effect? Like maybe a member of the Holy Trinity?
The Holy Spirit might do that.
Yeah, exactly. Because that can also be the gift of speaking in tongues or the interpretation of tongues. Similarly, there can be various ways that are not connected with the devil that one could know distant or hidden. Other ways that one could have abnormal physical strength. So those are indicative potentially, but you have to evaluate them as to whether they are or are not from the devil, because all of them can be explained in other ways, whether other natural ways, other paranormal ways, or other supernatural ways, like from God. So we have to proceed to the next indicator, which is it says, since, however, signs of this kind are not necessarily to be reckoned as coming from the devil, it is also necessary to pay attention to other things, especially those of the moral and spiritual order, which in another way manifest diabolical intentions, as, for example, vehement aversion to God, the most holy name of Jesus, the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints, the church, the Word of God, sacred things and rites, especially sacramental ones, and from sacred images. And finally, sometimes the relation of all the signs of faith and to spiritual combat in the Christian life must be carefully weighed, since the evil one, first of all, is the enemy of God and of everything that unites the faithful together with the salvific action of God. So you have a number of things that could be from God or from the devil or from somewhere else, but kind of the clincher criterion seems to be an aversion to holy things. So whether it's God's name or the Bible or a rosary or a holy card or a statue of a saint or whatever it may be, things of the moral and spiritual order are really what kind of point you in the direction of the devil as being responsible for various phenomena rather than God or something else being responsible for the same phenomena.
Thanks, Jimmy. That'll bring us right to the break, as a matter of fact. Lots of folks on the line, as you might expect when Jimmy's here for Open Forum. So we will take a quick break and be right back with lots of calls for Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live.
Your questions, Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
Before I took a nap earlier today, I woke up listening to your show, and that's what encouraged me to call. It's incredible for me to also get to talk to you guys, and I really love what y'all do. About a year and a half back, I was in depression, and listening to your show pulled me out. I promise you guys, y'all pulled me out. It's a beautiful thing. The Lord is for real. I really love this show and love the Lord and love this moment.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. I got to tell you this before I go to the phone lines, but I'll say it quickly. There's a fall sale on right now at shop.catholic.com, and everything is on sale. Everything that Catholic Answers sells is on sale at shop.catholic.com. Prices from 10 to 25% off, in a few cases, more than that. Shop.catholic.com. We go now to Carl in Cleveland, Ohio, listening on 1260 AM. Carl, thank you for your call and for your patience. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes. I was talking to a Protestant friend of mine, and he kind of blindsided me when he came up with, Henry VIII took over the church because he was there by divine right. And I didn't know how to answer him. And I tried to do some research, and the only thing I can find is when David was made king, that it was sanctified. And I don't know, was that the start?
Well, okay, so this is a concept that was around in, particularly in medieval Europe, although it also has occurred since the medieval ages. The doctrine is frequently referred to as the divine right, R-I-G-H-T, the divine right of kings. And the basic idea is that whatever king is in power, it's because God has given that king a right to rule. And there are precedents for this in Scripture. One of them is indeed with David. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel as king of Israel, but then so was Saul, and other kings similarly were anointed, and they were regarded as being backed in their authority by the Lord. So you have the kings of Israel being referred to, and Judah being referred to as the Lord's anointed. And that is a symbol in the ancient mind of their rule being backed by the authority of God. You also, in the New Testament, have statements that whatever the ruling authorities are, even if they're pagans, they are functioning as God's servants. This is something that St. Paul explores, for example, in Romans chapter 13. It's also discussed elsewhere in the New Testament, but basically the idea is that whoever is in power because God allowed it, and they should be ruling in such a way that they serve God. And various rulers will do that to greater or lesser extents. One of the questions that came up in the Middle Ages, though, was what about if a ruler becomes a tyrant and begins abusing his people and not ruling to their benefit? Can you take steps to either depose or even assassinate a tyrant? And this was a question of discussion in the Middle Ages, but you had respected authorities saying, yeah, you can. In the case of a tyrant, you can commit tyrannicide if it's the only way to get rid of the tyrant and stop the abuse of the people. So while it was recognized that ruling authorities do have a kind of divine backing, that it doesn't give them unlimited rights to do whatever they want, and they can forfeit their position for serious enough abuses. Also, it was recognized in the Middle Ages and subsequently that the church is not subject to the ruling authorities. There was what's known as the two swords doctrine, and one sword being the sword of the state and the other being the sword of the church. And it was recognized that the spiritual sword, the one possessed by the church, was independent of and higher than the secular sword that was possessed by the state. So that Henry VIII, for example, even though he had divine backing, at least provisionally, as a ruler of England, that didn't mean that he could subject the church in his territory to his authority and become the supreme head of the church in England, because the spiritual power is independent of and superior to the secular power on the common understanding of the time. And so Henry VIII abused his office, and subsequently popes even absolved English Catholics of their responsibility towards the crown at various periods. So there was a recognition at the time that Henry VIII was doing stuff he shouldn't have done, and that was not justified under the so-called divine right of kings.
Okay, Carl?
Yeah, one thing. What about the Pope actually coming out and saying he did not have authority since he was abusing it? Did he not do that because of a fear of war or something like that?
I would have to look to see whether it happened specifically during the reign of Henry VIII. I believe that it did, but it definitely happened in English history. It was pointed out that this was an illegitimate usurpation of the rights of the church, and that Henry VIII and subsequent English monarchs had abused their authority.
Carl, thanks very much. Appreciate that. I'm going to keep moving because every single line is full. Coming back here to California, where Joseph is listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Joseph, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the radio show. My question is, I'm a practicing Catholic. I have two kids, under 3, and we are expecting our third child. And
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And I was trying to understand Catholic teaching on how many number of kids. I know it's a personal question and it's different for everyone. It has to be discerned between the couple with God, with Christ. But there's a section somewhere in some document written by a pope that says responsible parenthood, meaning if the childs are too close together, if I'm not able to give the same attention to the just a year-old, then is it incorrect of me having more kids? And second, I constantly keep hearing in Catholic circles that, you can go to natural family planning, NFP, and there are different methods, this Creighton method, this, that talk about the differences, but they all tell you how to, but they don't tell you when to. And from my understanding, when you use NFP is when there is a serious reason, like your wife will have some health issues because of pregnancy or something of that nature. It's a serious nature, and that's the only time when you should pursue NFP.
So, Joseph, is that what you would like Jimmy to answer about how do we make the decision when we can use natural family planning?
Yeah, when and the responsible parenthood topic, where if I'm having kids too close together and I'm not able to give the same amount of attention that I was able to my first child.
Okay.
Is that incorrect then?
All right.
Well, the church certainly recognizes that one can space births in order to achieve a variety of different goods, not only the good of the child, but also the good of the spouses. Because if you've got a certain number of children and they're coming really quickly, it's not just a matter of, what will be to the detriment of the child, but what's to the detriment of the parents as well. So there is a prudential judgment call about the spacing of births. Kind of naturally, historically, when breastfeeding was the norm, there was a sort of built-in limit because there's a kind of built-in spacing of births, because when women are lactating, they tend not to get pregnant. And so you'd have a baby, and then you would breastfeed the baby, and you would tend not to get pregnant until such time as the child was weaned, which might be a few years. It varies from culture to culture, but sometimes children don't get weaned until later on, and so there was a kind of built-in spacing back then. These days, that's not as common. In the 20th century, it became a lot less common to have that built-in spacing because a lot of people started using formula instead of breast milk, and so a lot of mothers would get pregnant more quickly. But in principle, there is a recognition that it's legitimate to space births based on a variety of factors, including not only the good of the child, but also the good of the mother, the good of the father, the good of the other children in the family, and various, economic and health and psychological considerations as well. In terms of the gravity of that needs to be present for when one can legitimately have recourse to natural family planning, there's an unfortunate misunderstanding on this. There were some translations of the 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae, where Pope Paul VI discussed natural family planning and contraception, and they translated it as there needs to be a serious reason. But that's not actually the language that is used in Latin in Humanae Vitae. There are words for things like serious and grave, but those words are not used in the Latin of Humanae Vitae. Instead, Humanae Vitae refers to using natural family planning for a just cause, justus in Latin. And a just cause in canon law and moral theology is any cause that is not illegal. So it's anything, it means something more than just free choice, but not much more. Any kind of positive reason you would have would count as a just cause, meaning it's not one that's forbidden by the law. And so actually the standard, now people can apply higher standards if they want. They could say, well, we as a family have made a choice that we're not going to use NFP unless we get into a serious situation, like a serious health crisis or a serious financial crisis. But that's not actually required. In terms of what's required, it's the just cause standard, which is the lowest of the standards, actually.
Joseph, I am going to leave it there because I realize we are just full with calls and there are lots of people on. So I hope that was helpful to you. I hope that addressed what you needed to address. Karen in Colorado, listening on the EWTN app, is next. Karen, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, I have a Vatican II question.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We've heard from our priest a couple times that Vatican II said to take all of the saints' relics out of the altars, and I was just wondering about this.
Well, it would appear that, now I haven't heard what your priest said, but it would appear that he's mistaken, because in the current Code of Canon Law, this is Canon 1237, Section 2, so Code of Canon Law 1237, Section 2, it says, the ancient tradition of placing relics of martyrs or other saints under a fixed altar is to be preserved according to the norms given in the liturgical books. So the Code of Canon Law endorses the practice of having relics under the fixed altar in a church. There are some regulations concerning it in the liturgical books, but the practice is still fundamentally endorsed, and thus Vatican II did not call for the practice to be abolished.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
No problem.
I appreciate that call. Boy, that leaves us time for... Boy, you were quick, Karen. I appreciate that. That leaves us time to get to Emma in Hayden, Idaho, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Emma, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Can you take me next? I'm changing a diaper right now.
Oh, we'll come back to you after the break, Emma. You get that diaper changed. Let's go instead. Well, let's go to Trooper in Austin, Texas, listening on 88.5 FM. Trooper, unless you're changing a diaper, you are up next. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Well, Jimmy, when you first came on, I thought you were talking about my Latin. even when I was a altar boy, I didn't quite get it, and that's one reason I'm so favorable towards Vatican II.
Mm-hmm.
The vernacular just makes it so much easier.
How can I help
Would
you
you
today,
agree?
Trooper?
Oh,
as far as the use of vernacular in the liturgy, well, I think that there are costs and benefits to whatever language you use in the liturgy. It's sometimes pointed out that by having the liturgy in Latin, people tended to know Latin a little bit, at least a little bit more back then than they do now, and you could more easily have a mixed language congregation. Whereas if, let's say if you live in an area like Southern California here, where we have a multilingual society, it can be a little more challenging, but there's more to say about that on the other side of the break.
Trooper, hang on if you can, and we'll get Jimmy will finish his answer to you, and then if the diaper is done being changed, we'll go to Emma in Hayden, Idaho. More Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live right after this. The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with Why We're Pro-Life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As Catholic apologetics have gotten stronger, Protestant responses have gotten stronger as well. And now they have their own answers to rebut the standard Catholic proofs. Don't fret, we've got you covered. In his new book, Meeting the Protestant Response, apologist Carlo Broussard gives well-reasoned biblical answers to Protestant comebacks. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Response today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Matt Swaim here. Tomorrow on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll celebrate the feast of Blessed Carlo Acutis and get you all the latest news, weather, sports, and a whole lot more. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's Open Forum, and Jimmy Akin is our guest. And at the moment, every line is full. If you want to try us in a few minutes, lines will open up. 888-318-7884. Right now, we're talking with Trooper, who was asking about, Jimmy, your view on the use of the vernacular. Trooper's sense is he really likes it. He didn't like doing the Latin as a kid, as an altar server. But your sense of the use of the vernacular in the Mass?
Well, there are costs and benefits to anything. As I was mentioning before the break, a lot of areas are multilingual. Like, for example, here in Southern California, the primary language that most people speak is English, but there are also a lot of Spanish speakers, and there are other linguistic communities here too. There are people who speak Vietnamese, there are people who speak Japanese, there are people who speak Chinese. There's lots of different languages here, and that can pose some challenges if you're saying the Mass in the vernacular, because you've got a bunch of vernaculars.
Mm-hmm.
And if I speak English, well, okay, I can go to a Spanish speaking Mass, or Vietnamese speaking Mass, but if I haven't studied those languages, I'm not going to get as much out of it. Whereas if everybody, regardless of their vernacular language, if they're a Catholic, if they've studied a little bit of Latin, they can get something out of it, and nobody feels like, oh, this Mass isn't for me because it's not in my native language. Instead, it's in a common universal language used by the entire Latin Rite. So even if I don't speak Latin, it's not like I'm being excluded here. So some people can get their feathers ruffled if it's like, oh, well, this other Mass, I'm an outsider to it because I don't speak that. I don't speak Spanish, or I don't speak Vietnamese, or whatever.
Right.
Now, personally, I don't take offense at that because I love languages. And even if I don't speak the language, I enjoy experiencing other cultures, and, it doesn't bother me. But it does bother some people. And so there are costs and benefits. I don't have a strong opinion regarding the language in which liturgy, quote unquote, should be celebrated. I recognize there are benefits to doing it in the vernacular. There are also benefits to doing it in a special common sacred language. And in some rites of the church today, they don't always say it in the vernacular. Some do say it in ecclesiastical languages that go way back. Now in terms of I would say I don't have a strong opinion about the language, in part because I love all languages. But do I personally enjoy having the vernacular celebration of liturgy? Sure, I do. I mean, I study Latin, but it's easier for me to follow English. And I like to be able to follow along, mentally with not just with the general flow of the Mass, but with the details of the Mass. So, just as a matter of personal taste, I like vernacular celebrations. I also like celebrations in Latin and Aramaic and Old Church Slavonic and all the other languages too. So I think that we should, rather than dividing up into sides over this issue, we should appreciate both the ability to hear the sacrament celebrated in our own language and the historic traditions that have also been used by the church.
Trooper, thank you very, very much. I hope that was a helpful answer for you. I'm going to go to back to Emma now in Hayden, Idaho, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Hi, Emma. You ready to go?
Hi. Yeah, I am ready to go. Just a quick question. Is God the Father like the boss of the Trinity? Like the king's son isn't as important as the king? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we need to the first thing we need to do here is distinguish between the nature that is shared by the three persons of the Trinity, because they share a single common divine nature, which is why there is only one God. It's because they're all three participate in the same divine nature, and so they are all equally God. They are all equally holy. They are all equally omnipotent and omniscient. They all have the same divine attributes equally, and so they are all equal in that sense. And it would not be appropriate, to my mind, to describe any one of them as being more important than the others. At the same time, the three persons do have distinct roles. And and God has chosen to reveal himself to us using the imagery of a family. So you have God the Father and God the Son. And in the order of persons in a family, now, Cy Kellett, you're a father, right?
Yes.
You have sons.
Yes.
From one perspective, now you and your sons are both human beings. Are you more important than your sons from that perspective?
No, not at all. We're the same.
Equally human. But in the order of the family, do you have some prerogatives that your sons don't?
Fewer and fewer, but yes, I do. Yes,
As they get older, yes, children assume more responsibility.
Right.
So God the Father does have certain prerogatives or performs certain things as part of his role as the in Greek, the term is arche. It means source or origin of the Trinity, since the other two persons proceed from him. And as the arche, he does certain things like make choices that the others, that the Son and the Holy Spirit implement, but they do so in a frictionless way. It's not like they oppose the will of the Father. They want to do the will of the Father. So we have to be a little careful here. There's no real, at least there's none that springs to mind off the top of my head, of a Greek or Hebrew word for boss. And if, I mean, the closest I can think of off the top of my head in Greek would be like kurie or kurios, which would mean Lord. But we want to be a little careful. There is a sequence to the persons, and that sequence is reflected in what they do, making the Father comparable to a human father and the Son comparable to a human son. But we don't want to exaggerate the differences in a way that would pit the persons in opposition to each other, like a child may resent a parent, or an employee may resent a boss. That does not happen in God. And we want to also recognize that they are all equal in that they share a common divine nature, and thus are all equally God.
Emma, thanks. A little bit of Holy Trinity after changing the diaper. That's pretty good. That's pretty good work there for your day. I'm going to keep moving. Lots and lots of folks on the line. Up next, we go to Peoria, Illinois. David in Peoria, Illinois, listening on Catholic.com. David, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, Jimmy, because I think you and I have the similar characteristic of having many different interests and liking to learn about many things.
Uh-huh.
And I've been struggling to find a good balance between my work in ministry and my own personal interests and studies, and also with, making sure that I'm taking personal responsibility of my spiritual care and spiritual life and taking care of the family and all that, finding a good balance in those things. I wondered if you had any advice or wisdom you could share from your own experience with that.
Well, it's a subject that every conscientious religious person has to deal with, and the answers are not the same for everybody. The answers for a family man with a wife and children are different than the answers for a celibate priest. Obviously, if you're a celibate priest, you have a vocation to spiritual service in a way that an ordinary layman doesn't. You also don't have the distractions, if you're a celibate priest, of having a wife and children that you need to devote time to. I would say that fundamentally, for every Christian, God is our ultimate priority. However, that does not translate into spending the majority or even the plurality of our time on religious or spiritual activities. One of the principles that's used in the New Testament is whatever you do it to the Lord. So if I spend 8 hours a day working, well, that's fine. I should work in such a way that I try to please the Lord. And it doesn't mean I've got to, I've spent 8 hours working, I better spend 10 hours praying. You don't have to do that. You can serve God by how you do your work. You similarly can serve God by how you tend to your family and how you tend to your own needs. So rather than putting them in opposition to each other, I would recognize that our most important priority, which is God, is served by how we do the other things. We do need to devote some time to God. We need to, for example, fulfill the minimums like, going to Mass on holy days, on Sundays and holy days of obligation. We need to observe the Church's laws of fast and abstinence when those apply. We need to find some time for personal prayer. It doesn't have to be extensive, but it needs to be part of our lives regularly. We also may want to spend time studying the Bible and doing spiritual reading if we're able, but that we also need to work around the other competing demands on our time, such as the need to work, and earn a living, the need to spend quality time and quantity time with our spouse and with our children, and also take time to rest and relax. One of the things, now my vocation as an apologist is a little different, but one of the things I learned many years ago is if I pursue that ministry in a certain way, I will burn out. Because, for example, the internet happened in the 1990s, and I've left myself accessible. My email address is online, and people email me with questions, and if I said to myself, I have to take responsibility for everything that's going on with these people and make sure everybody gets a response and make sure it's thorough and make sure it's comprehensive and all that stuff, I wouldn't have any time left for myself, and I would go nuts, and I would eventually burn out. This is a principle that was recognized by Jesus himself. He had people pursuing him and wanting healings and things like that, and he would say to the disciples at various points, let's go away to a lonely place so that we can rest and recuperate and commune with God and not constantly having to meet the needs of others. And that's a principle that applies to anybody who works seriously in ministry. It applies to apologists. It's going to apply to priests. There's just a limit to what I can do, and I want to make myself available. I want to do what I can to help people, but I cannot take such responsibility for helping other people that I will burn myself out, because then I'm not going to do good to anybody if I'm burned out. And so that's a limit to what I can do that I've discerned. And so I don't put the burden on myself to answer every single email I get, because I get dozens a day. I mean, it would be a full-time job or more answering them. But I do try to prioritize, and the people who have the most sensitive things, I try to make an effort to help them and do so as quickly as I can. So those are some limits that I've discerned in my own situation. And in your situation, David, it would be a question of experimenting, seeing what the results of different balances you might strike are, and experimenting and finding your limits, and then staying away from those limits and setting boundaries, and over the course of time experimenting with different mixes and seeing what ends up working best for you.
And David, thank you for that call. I have to leave it there because I got to take this break, and lots more calls for Jimmy Akin before we end today. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN has its own official YouTube channel with tens of thousands of videos covering just about every conceivable topic of interest to Catholics. And, best of all, it's free. Every day, EWTN adds new TV shows, live events, devotionals, homilies, and specials to its YouTube channel. Visit the EWTN YouTube channel today. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's Open Forum today. Still so many folks on the line that I'm going to try to go a bit quickly, so let's go right back to the phones. Trevor in Omaha, Nebraska, watching on YouTube. Trevor, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. So I'm trying to explain to a Protestant friend of mine the idea that Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant. And so I don't really have the greatest understanding of it. I'm trying my best. So I came here for advice on how to kind of get that across better. And if you could provide like scriptural quotes to support our argument, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, well, the title Ark of the Covenant is one that is frequently applied by Catholics to Mary, and it's something that I think we have to be a little careful with, because it's not necessarily exclusive to Mary. You also can, this is an example of typology, and frequently a type can point to more than one thing. So there are ways to legitimately look at Mary as the New Testament antitype of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, for example, contained several objects, one of which was a pot of manna, and manna being the food that God had given the Israelites in the wilderness, and they preserved a pot of the manna inside the Ark of the Covenant. Jesus links himself in John 6 to the manna or bread from heaven that God gave, and he says, that's what I am. So he identifies himself as the manna or bread from heaven, which was contained within the ark. Well, was Jesus ever contained within anybody's cykellet?
He was indeed, only Mary.
Yeah, so Mary contained Jesus the same way the Ark of the Covenant contained the manna. And Jesus identifies as the manna, so you could say, okay, from one perspective, Mary would be an antitype that corresponds to the Ark of the Covenant, because she contained Jesus the way the Ark contained the manna. On the other hand, there are other ways of looking at the Ark of the Covenant. It also contained the Ten Commandments, and Jesus himself is the living expression of the law of God. And you could look at the Ark and say, well, there's also a sense in which Jesus is an antitype of the Ark of the Covenant. So, symbols don't have to be exclusive. Sometimes they refer to more than one thing. And so if your friend says, well, I think Jesus is the Ark of the Covenant, I wouldn't fight him about that. I'd say, yeah, sure. From one perspective, Jesus is. From another perspective, Mary is. And so that's kind of the general answer I would give. There have been some who have proposed that the language that Luke uses in describing Mary's visit to Elizabeth in Luke chapter 2 is reminiscent of language that's used about the movements of the Ark of the Covenant in 1st or 2nd Samuel. And so you might do a little bit of Googling about Mary, Ark of the Covenant, Luke 2, and Samuel, and you can see what's been proposed about that. I haven't studied that argument carefully. I do recognize there's some similarity in the language that's used regarding Mary and her visit to Elizabeth and the language that's used regarding the Ark of the Covenant, but I don't have a strong opinion at this point about whether the language is similar enough to suggest that Luke was consciously thinking of that, as opposed to it being a coincidence that this similar language happened to be used. There are also early church fathers who identify Mary as the Ark of the New Covenant. And if you look at Catholic.com and type in Mary and Ark of the Covenant, a number of resources, including some with the fathers, should come up for you.
Trevor, thank you. As you heard, it's quite busy right now, and we're running up towards the end, so I'm going to keep moving. I hope that was helpful to you. I'm going to go now to Chicago, Illinois, where Joseph is listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Joseph, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. So my question is around some of the stories in the Old Testament. I read things, there's certain rules, like, for example, women cannot enter the temple during menstruation, or even, the rules prescribed for picking up a stick, during the Sabbath, and the punishment being so severe. I want to understand, what are the reasons for this kind of thing, and how do I reconcile it with a different tone in the New Testament, or at least a different tone that I perceive in the stories of Jesus?
Okay, so in regard to women not entering the temple during menstruation, it's because they had contracted what was known as ritual. Today it's referred to as ritual uncleanness. And the reason that the word ritual is added is to clarify that this is not moral uncleanness. It is not immoral for a woman to have a period. It doesn't say anything about her moral character. And so this was a purely ritual form of uncleanness. And it didn't apply just to women. Men also could contract ritual uncleanness and for comparable bodily discharges. So, for example, if a man had a nocturnal emission, or if he engaged in relations with a woman, he would have an emission and that would make him unclean. So both the menstrual blood and male emissions would make both sexes unclean. So it wasn't unique to women. You just became ritually unclean when you had certain kind of bodily discharges. And presumably the reason that God used this in his dealings with the Israelites was as a kind of teaching purpose, that we need to be morally clean when we go before God. We don't want to intrude moral uncleanness in God's presence. And one way of teaching that point was by saying, okay, don't then intrude ritual uncleanness into God's presence. The idea would be that ritual uncleanness is a symbol. It's not actually moral impurity, but it's a symbol of moral impurity. And so we want to honor God by being morally pure, and one way of teaching that lesson is also by being ritually pure. However, circumstances change, and one of the things that Jesus wanted to do was open up the kingdom of God to people who were not Jewish and did not follow the Jewish law and did not have all of this as cultural background. And so he declared, and this is in Mark chapter 7, he declared that nothing that enters a man, talking about food laws, nothing that enters a man makes him unclean, because it doesn't pass into his heart. It's things that come from your heart, like thoughts of murder and adultery and stuff. That's what makes you unclean in the ultimate important sense. That's moral uncleanliness. The ritual uncleanliness is less important because, as Jesus says, whatever you eat doesn't go into your heart, but it passes through your body. And then actually what he says, they generally don't translate it this way in English, but he says it goes into the latrine. And he actually uses the word for latrine or toilet. But there was a shift in the age. And similarly, a lot of the stricter requirements, like don't pick up sticks on the Sabbath, that was a didactic effort to kind of nail home the point for the Israelites when they were at a very early primitive stage, kind of like when you've got really little children, you set very strict rules for them, and then as they grow and mature, you can relax the rules and let them exercise more judgment. Well, something similar happened here, to where Jesus, by 1,000 years after, 1,200 years after the time of Moses, the Israelites had progressed enough that they could take a more nuanced approach to these laws. And instead of let's stone anybody who picks up sticks on the Sabbath, Jesus was teaching that you can do work on the Sabbath when there's a sufficient reason, like doing good and healing people who need healing, or if your sheep falls in a pit, you can get the sheep out of the pit on the Sabbath, so it's not all down there for 24 hours bleeding in distress. So Jesus wanted people to engage in a more nuanced approach to God's laws, recognizing the human values that they were trying to promote and not applying them in as woodenly strict a way.
Joseph, thank you very much for the call and for the question. Thanks to everybody who called, but we are not going to be able to get to everybody today. But don't worry, Jimmy's back Thursday, right? You're back Thursday.
Yeah, I'm back Thursday.
All right, so you can call again then. We'll have open forum again on Thursday. That does it for this hour. Don't forget, we've got that big store-wide sale going on right now over at shop.catholic.com. Everything's on sale. Everything is on sale. 10, 25%, in some cases more than 25%. Check it out at shop.catholic.com. Also remember, coming this Friday, the second Cuban Missile Crisis, the one you didn't hear about. That's the topic on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find. Oh, please give me the internet address again, Jimmy. For Jimmy.
Mysterious.fm.
Yeah, that's so easy. Why can't I just get that? Mysterious.fm. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.